Hello and welcome everybody to another Charleston Leadership Interview. I'm Erin Gallagher and I'm the Chair of Acquisitions and Collection Services at the University of Florida. I'm also a Charleston Conference Director, and this is one of my favorite parts of the conference season every year is the leadership interviews, which we now do virtually. And I'm so pleased to be here today with Zan Arch, Dean of Libraries at Portland State University, and someone who I've known professionally for a very long time now. So, Zan, let's just get right into it. What was your library origin story, and what was your relationship to libraries before you started working in them?
Thanks, Erin, and thank you very much to invite me to do this today. I checked out armfuls of books from public libraries weekly when I was a kid, and my parents were academics, so they definitely knew university libraries, but actually I rarely engaged in libraries as an undergrad. It wasn't something that was really part of my university experience, so they weren't really familiar with me to me until I was temping after college, actually, and ended up in a temp job at the Duke Business Library. And that it was sort of a random coincidence. Carlton Brown, who's still at the Duke Business Library, taught me to copy catalog microfilm of all things. And when I moved back to the Bay Area, I applied for a serials receiving job at Stanford based on that sort of very slim experience. And then I really would say the Stanford Library team was amazing mentors. They encouraged me to go to library school. They provided opportunities once I had my degree. So it wasn't really a calling as much as a series of coincidences, but I feel very lucky that my career found me, and I'm grateful for some of these early mentors and encouragers for this for me. So
Well, and it's really not unusual. I've been doing these interviews for several years now, and even with myself, it really does seem like a series of happy coincidences that lead us to librarianship. I don't know that I've ever spoken to someone who said, I knew in elementary school that I was going to be a librarian.
I was
Yeah,
called for it. Yeah.
even though it's really on brand when you know people and you think like, oh well, yeah, you were destined to be a librarian, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I go to my high school reunion. They're like, oh, of course, you
yeah.
always were meant for this. I was like, was I? Okay.
Oh, so I really enjoyed your the plenary panel that you were a part of at last year's Charleston conference, which sounds crazy to say last year, but it was last year. It was on leading in times of crisis. And I got to thinking about how ever since I've been in librarianship, it really does seem like our careers can be kind of measured by crisis after crisis, the journal's crisis, the internet crisis. What do you think makes this moment different?
I'll say a few things. I mean, this is maybe an obvious one, but the number of colliding crises right now is notable. And I also think that we're sharing a lot of our current crises with our parent institutions and like higher ed as a whole, which hasn't always been the case. We've had technology waves and budget waves that really affected libraries, but right now there's really significant budget, political, and technological pressures on higher ed, and really coming on the heels of a lot of so just feelings and burnout from pandemic era days, a lot of the changes wrought by the racial justice movements of the last few years, and so we're I think in this sort of nexus of crises, which has been an interesting time to be a professional, and I think it's going to really make us evolve in ways that are not going to feel comfortable in a lot of cases. It was interesting to go into that panel too to think about how we approach something like this evolution. Like we know this evolution is happening, we know these crises are happening, and how do we approach them as leaders, which is not necessarily easy. And I think as we talked about a bit in that group, transparency certainly, and understanding our teams and what they need to make sure to navigate it successfully.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is kind of astounding to realize that it's 2026. We're technically 5 years out from the pandemic, and it has rocked us as individuals. It's rocked our institutions, our culture, our professional dynamics. And it really is uncomfortable to realize that that's what we're living in now. This isn't just a
Yeah.
phase, this is the world we live in now. So yeah, I can see how that's different. Mm.
Yeah, it's been notable switching institutions post pandemic and thinking about how different institutions, even in the same town, had different kind of life paths through that. And so even coming to a new institution, understanding their experience of the pandemic was not something that was a given based on what I'd learned from my previous institution. So we've all sort of made our way through it in different ways.
Well, on a lighter note, I really loved your video, the Dean's Decoded video. And if others haven't seen this, look it up. You could probably just Google Dean's Decoded Zan Arch. And it's a really great video where we get to step into your office there at Portland State, which was super cozy. I really like the coziness of your office. But at that time of the video, you were close to finishing your dissertation. So I'm assuming I can give you congratulations on achieving your PhD. Yay,
Mhm.
awesome.
Yeah.
So the you had talked about how your dissertation was on equity and hiring practices in academia. So what drew you to this area of study?
Well, first I will say I have not watched my Dean's Dakota video, so I'm
It's
glad it
so
was good.
good. It's good. Yeah.
I can't watch myself in video. I was like, "No, I'm never gonna see that." So, yeah, but yes, I did finish the dissertation and thank you very much for the congrats on both, fronts. But I was really drawn to this topic when I completed the Oregon State Search Advocate training in 2020. It was speaking of pandemic, it was early March 2020 when I finished
Whoa.
that Search Advocate training. So it was an interesting time to be in a room with a bunch of people being like, "Oh, is something's happening?" I think, and it was a program intended to train people to play a role on search committees promoting equitable hiring practices. And so after the training, I started to serve as an advocate. So going into search committees across campus, and it made me very interested in really the power dynamics of search committees, which I think a lot of us have experienced, and especially as they relate to the advocate, because it's supposed to be a peer in that committee that is monitoring bias. And I really found like I was able to do it very effectively, and I think and get people to listen to me. And I realized that was because I was a dean.
Mm,
And so that made me really think about how those power dynamics work in a search committee and how someone like designed to promote equity can be more or less effective based on their own personal and professional characteristics, and how we would create structures to make that work for a broad variety of people. And so I really wanted to contribute to this area of research, even though it's not library related. I think hiring just being such a human process, sort of masquerading as objective process,
hmm.
is fascinating to me. And we all know stories about when it goes very wrong
Yeah.
because we're very good as people at evaluating other people. And in ways that are not necessarily always objective. So it really drew me into that topic, even as things in the last year have really changed post dissertation. The Oregon State program is closed. A lot of the search advocate work that was happening has gone away, unfortunately. So it's been an interesting time to graduate with that focus and then not necessarily know what to do with all that energy. So,
Well, I'm always a fan of lifelong learning. You know, we
yeah.
we should never stop learning. It makes me terrified the thought of going back to school for any kind of degree program. And I think, how in the world, like, how would I clone myself and make this work? So I'm interested in, what guidance do you have for other library professionals who might be considering going into, pursuing a doctoral program? And then how the heck did you just balance those responsibilities with, deaning while pursuing the doctorate?
Yeah. So first of all, I went to a program that was meant for people who are working full time. So
Uh,
that certainly helps. And it was, and so the other students like me were working full time, and I was able to not only figure out what worked best for me, but also watch them figure out what worked best for them. And the one thing I've learned from that is that there isn't a one way to do it. So like I could give guidance, but like what I did specifically was I would get up at 6 a.m. every day before my family got up because they're loud and busy. And I would work for an hour on the doctoral work and then start work for the day.
mm,
That does not work for a lot of people,
yeah.
early mornings, like the same thing every day, like incremental progress. And I had colleagues in the program who would do nothing for 3 weeks and then take an entire weekend, go to a hotel and work for 48 hours, and they would make huge amounts of progress. And we all got to the same place at the end. And so I think what I learned through those years of that program was that there wasn't one way to do it. And I couldn't go and say, here's the way it's going to work best for you, because getting up at 6 a.m. and working for an hour every day might drive you nuts. And so I think understanding what works for you and then doubling down on that is probably my best advice. And also Zotero. Zotero is amazing.
Yes, love Zotero.
I love Zotero so much. Yeah. I got to really like know and love it. So,
Yeah. Also, I just think that's really good. That's really good advice as far as listen to your own self and what works best for you, because I am also that early morning person. I'd be up at 6 a.m. That's when I'm the sharpest. I fade in the afternoon and I'm like useless. So
Yeah.
but that doesn't work for everybody, and I think if
No.
we assume that there's, a one size fits all kind of paint by numbers approach, then you're just going to get really frustrated and feel like you're failing.
Yeah, and I think also just the incremental versus like sort of all in focus,
Yeah.
that really varies by people. Like I can do like a half an hour work on something and then
Mhm.
switch gears, and not everybody does that well, And but if you gave me like 5 hours to work on something, I would just drift off,
Yeah, right.
because like it's like a squirrel or like something else is happening. So it just people work very differently, and you have to understand that enough about yourself.
Well, still, congrats. That's awesome. You're
Thank
an
you.
inspiration. You've also served in a lot of library leadership roles in Portland, and Portland is a city that I love. There is a lot to love about that city, because we both lived there at the same time. But you've been there for over 15 years in various library leadership roles. So I'm interested, what drew you to the Portland area in the first place, and then what keeps you there? What do you really love about living there?
Yeah, this is actually a really easy question because I was born and raised here. So I moved back in 2010 to be closer to my folks. And we actually now live with my mom in my childhood home.
Oh,
So
I love it.
I know, it's a little weird. I mean, it's good, but it's a lot.
Wow.
So and that's definitely kept me here. But also, I mean, as you say, like the sort of like low gray blanket that lasts for like 6 months out of the year, and like it's something that I really, it feels like home. So
Yeah.
it's intense green, access to the coast, and then it actually makes me feel really lucky too in joining PSU because it's the first time I work somewhere that's like very much dedicated to uplifting Portland.
Mm.
The other schools I worked at in Portland are great. That's something that they think about, but here PSU is let knowledge serve the city. And that's like, as a
Oh.
library downtown, as a mission, that's perfect.
Hmm.
Like we are downtown, we are letting our knowledge that we are providing to the city serve the city. And I like being able to combine that personal and professional affection for Portland.
I love that. I love the downtown vibe of that campus as well. When I lived there, I would frequently, take the train in downtown, and would just, we're winding our way through campus. And I always thought to myself how incredible it must have been to, it must be to be a student and have that kind of
Yeah.
experience. Like, you're immersed in your academics, but you're also immersed in this incredible downtown area of the city. And yeah, and so my history in Portland is that I assumed your prior role when you were at Reed College. And so we got to know each other that way. And Zan, you were very generous in, sharing advice and guidance, and, just thoughts on leadership with me when I got into that role. And also I was had moved 2,000 miles away from everyone I knew and loved. So, having a friendly face there to have coffee with was also really meaningful to me. But I'm also always interested in how people learn library leadership. So how do you feel like you learned that? And would you share some leaders who you consider particularly inspiring?
First, I'm very glad I was helpful. I don't remember being so helpful, so I'm really glad that I was helpful. Because and you were a wonderful choice for that role as well. I feel like this was actually a hard question for me to think about because I really feel like I learned leadership by managing people, really in working to understand what they need. I started managing really early in my career, and it doesn't seem like always the most cool way to think about leadership is like as a manager. There's like this aspect of vision and like forward thinking, but really I've always built that vision based on understanding the operations and the people who are doing it. And so that's something that's really been important for me in learning to lead. And there has been a need to layer on some skills to that, like working with provost, for example, like moving into a dean role, it was really challenging to think about what different kinds of communication was needed. And for people who don't really know what we do, I mean, truthfully, I don't feel like, for
Yeah.
the most part, upper administration knows what we do or what we're interested in. And so doing that kind of managing up was something I had to learn along the way. And, I think leadership training, professional development in that area did help somewhat. And some of it's also practice because every provost is also different.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
as well as every sort of user base that you have to learn how to approach as well. So in these transition points when I've needed additional skills, I've definitely needed to go out to professional development and find those ways to learn how to take the skills I've learned from managing my own teams to managing up and out to our users
Mm-hmm.
as well. Um, and I think, I guess maybe for the same in the same vein, I've had a I have a hard time thinking about like leaders that have provided me with inspiration as much as like sort of collecting bits of insight.
Yeah.
I'm much more of a magpie when it comes to leadership in terms of taking pieces of things that I like and putting it to a whole,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of it for me is based on individual skills and context in terms of how we lead well. And I don't think I lead in the same way as most other people I know, and even in those kind of same roles. So I take what I like and cobble it together into a strategy that works for me.
I think that's really smart because, if you think about how do you learn leadership or how do you learn, how to be a force for good in the life of
Yeah.
the people who you're leading. And there's no real way to do it other than, like you said, observing how have others led or managed me and then take the best. But the other side of that is also leaving the things that didn't work so well, so out of anyone who I've ever had in a leadership role in my professional life, there are good things that I try to emulate now, and then there are things that I think, yeah, that I wouldn't want to do that didn't work so well. So yeah, it's a good way to sort of cobble it together.
And I also say that, I mean, even speaking to like the search advocate pieces, things I learned through that, people react to me differently than they react to other leaders sometimes. I mean, there's a personal interaction in that process that has a lot to do with how people see you as a person and how you're able to present yourself in that role. And so that isn't going to be something that you can take necessarily from others as well.
Mm.
And so you need to understand enough about how people react to you as a person and use that to either mitigate some of that and, provide comfort where it might not be obvious, or, empower more of that in yourself and how people react to you.
I also really like the point about management as a way to learn leadership. Same
Mhm.
for me. I still think that some of my most challenging, informative experiences in getting to a leadership role in libraries happened before. In college, my job, I worked at a TCBY yogurt shop in Tallahassee, and I rose to a level of a manager there, and that was really incredibly formative in
Yeah.
uh, some of those challenges were really rough. You're managing a bunch of 18-year-olds working at a yogurt shop and we're open till midnight. And so yeah, many years later, I now think back to that as that was really some of the most valuable leadership experience I got. And I didn't even know it at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So bringing it back to the Charleston conference, even if you don't go every year, even if you kind of like go
Mhm.
every now and then as you can, what do you most look forward to in attending?
I mean, certainly seeing colleagues and friends, especially the last few years, it felt really heads down. These crises have coming rolling through, and we've been trying to sort of put out fires and figure out what to do next. And so it's been very helpful to go and see friends from, a lot of different eras of my library career. I mean, I came up through collections, acquisitions, technical services. And so I know a lot of the Charleston attendees still, and it's really nice to see folks and try to figure out how they're coping and how they are approaching some of these issues. I definitely like having that broad perspective that I get from the sessions. And then also, of course, the weather, because by November is so not
I know.
nice here. And so I'm just like, oh, please take me somewhere like sunny and warm for, a week. So
Yeah.
yes, it is always a great part of my year.
I think the weather this past year was some of the most beautiful we have ever had because, I mean, I'm in Florida, so going up to Charleston is always a respite. By November, we're
Yeah.
so sick of how hot it is that going to Charleston is like, oh, maybe it's a little bit cooler. But there have been a few years recently where it's just really, it's been kind of sweltering, and you're trying to make it between sessions. But this past year was just gorgeous. Oh, so nice.
Yeah, I could usually take sweltering though, because it's usually like, what, raining and, 45 here. So I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
whatever, it's just warming.
Well, so my favorite question is my final question. I love to ask everyone this, not only because I am a book nerd myself, but because then I get, recommendations. So, what is the best book you read over the past year?
So I will admit I'm doing a lot of my reading in audiobook right now. So
Or listen
I'm,
to? Yeah.
yeah, I know, it's okay. It's like caveat that I feel like I have to make. Well, it was an audiobook, however. Um, and this last year, sort of, I think I'd say the politics of this last year really gotten me out of Audible and moved to the public library app, Libby. And so I should have done it a long time ago. But Libby had served me some suggestions. I think it was one of the some month that it suggested a book that I really ended up liking a lot. It was called "Say Hello to My Little Friend"
Hmm.
by Janine Capo Cruzit.
Okay.
Anyway, so speaking of Florida, it's actually about Miami.
Ah,
It's about Miami. It's about climate change. It's about one famous movie and two famous books.
I'm guessing
So
the movie just by the quote, but
yeah, which actually was the only thing. I had never seen the movie and I'd read the books, and so it's a very fascinating and
oh,
very strange book. So I recommend it. It's an interesting one. So,
I love
in
it.
Florida related.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love any sort of Florida fiction or nonfiction. We are a pretty wild little swamp down here.
It's a
And
wild book. So
thank you so much, Zan. This has been wonderful catching up with you and talking with you again. And so thanks for joining us for this interview.
yes, thank you. It's great to see you. Thank you. See you soon, I hope.